Okay, it's the role of seaports to economic development of Nigeria. So, as you are quite aware, seaports are very important, to economic development of every country. And when it comes to supply chain, they serve as a huge, a sort of critical node in the global supply chain. Because if you look at it, over 90% of world trade is being carried through shipping. And then we tend to look at port as a gateway to nations' economy, because you can be able to move, 90% of world trade, but if you don't have a port where the ship will bat, all those your movement will be in vain. So that is how crucial a port is. So very quickly, I just want us to go through port to see what is a port. So to us as mariners, we tend to look at port as a safe place for ships to load and unload cargoes and to discharge passengers, to load passengers in the case of in the case of passenger ships. And then to someone who is a shipper, or who is a passenger, they see a port as an interface between land and water transportation. So that's how maybe a shipper or a passenger look at a port. So if you look at somebody who is a national economics, because national economy, they are concerned with money. So they look at port as a gateway, to nations' economy and international trade. So that's how a national economics look at a port. So generally a port has a variety of functions that you meet different activities, different stakeholders in port. The activities that take place in ports are multifunctional. So sometimes if you are doing research in port, it's better for you to streamline it to a certain type of cargo or to a certain type of port, i.e. maybe you research on container, bulk, or liquid cargo, because a lot of things takes place in ports. But if you look at it, if you move to places like China, where they will have a dedicated container ports, whereas if you come down to places like Africa, you only have container terminals within ports. So there are a bit of differences, as you move from nation to nation, from countries to countries. So let's look at an overview of Nigerian seaport. We have already defined what a port is. It's a place where ships load and unload cargoes. It's a gateway to nations' economy. It's an interface between land and sea transportation. So seaport business in Nigeria the history can be traced back to as far as 1913, when the first Apapa quays was built, and the first ship that docked there was called Akoko. So it's a very, very small ship that came to Apapa port. So we won't go to a full details of Apapa port or how Nigerian port started. So we just have to look at overview of Nigerian port system. And if you look in Nigeria today, ports have become an important, gateway to nations' economy. So I would say without port, it is impossible for us to import and export cargo in large quantities. Of course, we can be able to do that via air cargo, but the most cost-effective means of transporting cargoes is by shipping. And then where is the ship going to dock? It's going to dock in port. And then if you look at it today in Nigeria, over 90% of Nigerian trade is being handled by ports. That is why if you go to Apapa today, you can see the evidence of the traffic, the congestion. That's to show you how critical a port is. You won't get that kind of congestion in Oshodi bus station or whatever bus station you're going. That's to show you how important port is. So basically, they serve as gateway to nations' economy. They serve as interface between international trade and domestic trade. And then there are countries where we call them landlocked countries. So Nigerian ports tend to serve most of those landlocked countries, what we call the hinterland. So most of them, like you go to Chad Republic, Niger Republic, Burkina Faso, they rely on our ports for their export and import. So it's very, very important. And if you look at it, the statistic was released this year that shows that Nigerian ports alone generate about $1.02 trillion in the last 3 years. So you can see the revenue that has been generated by ports. You can see how this revenue will actually be used, to improve Nigeria economy or to tend to finance some parts of budgets, in the country. And although ports in Nigeria are quite important, they contribute to international trade, that's the gateway. But when it comes to GDP, Nigerian ports contribute an average of 1.6%, which is low when you compare to other nations like Singapore that contribute over 9%. So that is worth noting. So in Nigeria, Nigerian ports is divided into two. That is after the port reforms that took place between 2004 and 2006, where Nigerian assume, a form of landlord port system, where the MPA becomes a regulatory body and the terminal operators carry out all the operations in port. So it's a form of landlord system, so the cargo operations is being carried out by terminal operators. They concession that terminal to terminal operators for a period of some are 25 years, some are 30 years. So when Nigerian ports undergo this reform, it was split into two. You have the Western port and the Eastern ports. So the Western port, it comprised of Lagos Port Complex, which have 5 terminals after the reforms of 2004 to 2006. So the terminal consists of Apapa Bulk Company, which is the popular flour mills you guys knows about, the ENL Consortium, the APM terminal, which Max Line had deal with container. You have the Greenview, the Lily Pond. So the Tinkan also have 5 terminals there. You have Joseph Dam among them. Because of time, I'm not going to go in details. So if you go to Eastern ports, you have Rivers Port Complex that have 2 terminals. You have the PTO, Port Terminal Operators, and BOA. So One Terminal have 4 terminals as well. Calabar ports have 3 terminals and Delta ports have 5 terminals. So this is just a map showing the major ports in Nigeria. So as seafarers, we have different ports that we visit. Like I said, if you go to China, you will find a dedicated container port. If you go to Rotterdam, you find a dedicated container port. If you go to Long Beach, you find a dedicated container port. In Nigeria, we have container terminals within a port because a port actually consists of different terminals. Let's say different terminals made of a port becomes a port. So like you can see in the case of Apapa Port Complex, you have 5 different terminals that are made of Apapa Port Complex. So one type of port is called a container port that deals with container. So the other type of port is a dry bulk port, like the Apapa Bulk Company. So that particular port deals with bulk cargos, So we also have LNG ports, or we call oil ports. So you have this one in the case of Bonny terminals. If you go to SBMs, you have oil ports and etc. So you have what we call the ferry ports or the passenger ports. These ports mainly deal with passengers and sometimes do sort of roll-on, roll-off cargo because they can be able to carry cars, in addition to passengers. So it's another type of ports. This is the cruise ports. You find this one in Tenerife, Southampton, and etc. So for the sake of the next lesson, which we are going to cover shortly, why do we need to know about different types of ports? It's very, very important for us as mariners, to know different types of port, even if this is not a mandatory requirement for certificate of competency. It's very important for us to know different types of port to be able to analyze the industry. You understand? You need to understand how ports operate. It's not just for you to come and buy the ship alongside and cast off the ship, and also you need also to understand that operations are different between ports, So if you go to China, you have dedicated container ports like I've discussed before. If you come to Nigeria, you have a port that have different terminals that handle different types of cargo, bulk, liquid. So you need to know ports to know the different operations that happen. You also need to understand the different shipping companies that manage ports. Today, globally, a lot of companies, or what we call the major terminal operators, manage ports, like, the Hudson, APM terminals, These are all major terminals that handle ports. So you need to know those type of terminals, terminal operators that specialize in ports. So briefly, we'll look at how a shipping company can actually own a port, or how a terminal operator can own a port. You know, there are different ways. You can own a port through concession, like what happened during the port reforms of 2004 to 2006. And you can also own a port through leasing. They lease a particular place for you for a certain period of time. You can also sign an MOU with the government. You can also involve in the public-private partnership. So by you owning the port, you automatically become a terminal operator within that port. So briefly, we have different types of port management model. You know, the first one is a service port. And what service port means that the Port Authority owns all the infrastructure. That means they own the quay, the warehouse, you know, and also the dock workers. But there's a major drawback with this type of port. One of the drawbacks is you have to look at the labor, you know, the dock workers issue. There's always strike or one thing or the other that affects the efficiency of that particular port. The second issue, it has to do with decision making. When the Nigerian port system was under the service port model, every decision that is being taken in port, you have to consult, you know, the Minister of Transport, or sometimes it has to go through presidency. So decision process is, you know, slow because you are operating more of a centralized port system. You know, so the next type of port is called the tool port. In the tool port, you have the Port Authority is a landlord. They own the infrastructure, you know, they own the superstructure, but the dock workers or the labor workers, you know, are not owned by the Port Authority. They are being provided by private operators, you know. So the third type of port, you have what we call the landlord port administration system. That is what is currently being practiced in Nigeria. So in this type of port, you know, the Port Authority own the land, you know, and then terminal operators, you know, they concession these terminals to them. They bring in their equipment, you know, they bring in their expertise in management, and then they have a kind of public-private partnership where the government oversee the regulatory aspect of port operation, and the private operators are invested in the port. They carry on with their operations. The main advantage of this type of port is like it's a more of a decentralized type of port. There is a form of decentralization. They can take decision, you know, and on how to manage their system. And empirical evidence have shown that this type of port administration system has actually led to a greater form of efficiency. This type of port system is in practice in different parts of the world today because the government power is limited to regulatory function. Then you have what we call the private service ports. That means that the entire port is being controlled and managed by private sector. For example, you know, the Association of British Ports in UK is owned by private, is regulated by private. And also if you go to countries like Australia, they have also adopted this kind of model. So what are the roles of ports to economic development? Because I have 6 minutes to round up this to start the other part. One is port leads to economic growth. You know, when you have ports in, let's say in Apapa, you tend to have a lot of industry. It leads to industrialization, and industrialization serves as catalyst for economic growth. Secondly, ports also play a crucial role, you know, for poverty alleviation. Why do I say so? Because they create job opportunities, you know, for people that live within that area, you know, and they serve as source of wealth because they constitute a source of income and employment, you know, for people or that lives around that environment. You know, another thing is it generates revenue for government. Like we have said, Nigerian Port Authority has generated about 1.02 trillion, you know, from the revenue. So it's very, very important for you to know that. But there are certain facts about Nigerian port. I'll just keep this. It has to do with the index that have been published by World Bank that have to do with, you know, the World Economic Forum that ranks countries on quality of port infrastructure, you know, the global competitive logistic performance indicators, the global competitive index. You have to talk about the dwell time. The dwell time of a port is how many days does a ship stay in port to load or discharge cargo. So generally in Nigeria, that's what I want to pick. The dwell time, as we are all aware, is very, very high. Sometimes it can take as long as 14 days as against 48 hours, which we all know that there are some sort of inefficiency in the system. And also you have to look at the number of government agencies in port. We have multiple government agencies in ports. You have people duplicating rules. So that also leads to a form of inefficiency in the system. So it's very, very important for you to know. And also another thing, you tend to look at the corruption perception index. How is Nigeria being ranked in corruption perception index? How is Nigeria being ranked as what we call ease of trading across border? That have to do with the customs, the logistics aspect of it. How long does it take to clear cargo? So those are indicators that shows you whether a port is efficient or not. So you have different challenges that have to range from insecurity, absence of national trade data. We don't have really national trade data today. You have to talk about the documentation process. We are still in process of paper documentation, multiple government agencies, like I've mentioned, some sort of inconsistency in policies. You have this policy today, that policy tomorrow. You have sort of poor access, poor road access, lack of scanners, which have been a major problem. So it's very, very important for us to understand the challenges that seaports are facing. So how do you increase productivity in port? First, before you tend to increase productivity in port, you have to go back to basics to identify the root cause of problems in port. And how do you identify the root cause of these problems? You have to carry out research. You have to carry out either quantitative or qualitative research. When you are doing quantitative research, the best model is for you to be able to carry out a benchmarking, benchmark the operation of your port against other ports and see where you are lacking behind and areas where you can be able to improve your operation. So efficiency is a major problem, hindering port development. So it's very, very important, because once you have an efficient port leads to competition. When you have people tend to compete, and what happened at that point is competition leads to lower transportation costs, and it also facilitates imports and export. So it's very, very important for us to increase the productivity and efficiency in port. So how do you tackle most of this challenge? The first thing Nigerian government did between 2004 to 2006, I believe Captain Tayo and the rest of us here in the house will testify, before 2004, what happens in Apapa port. There are so many wharf rats, cargo theft, ships used to wait for more than 10, 15, 20 days, and then you look at lack of cargo handling equipment. Some of the equipment are being in a bad state, no maintenance, the road network, so many things were going wrong there. So that's why Nigerian government took that decision to reform the port system to get private sector's participation, So one of the ways to tackle challenges in port is through reforms. You reform the system. By reforming the system, you bring in expertise, you bring in private operators, you bring in people who are willing to invest in state-of-the-art equipment, to improve efficiency. Another part has to do with technology and innovation. As we are all aware, technology today drives efficiency and productivity. Intermodality has to do with rail, when you have rail and land transportation. Deepening the channel, if you deepen your channel, you have, large vessels that can be able to come into your port. You have to invest in infrastructure. Recently, the Nigerian government have launched what we call this truck call-up system, just to be able to curb this issue of congestion. So you have to look at private investors' participation in ports, and also you have to reduce multiple government agencies. So those are the ways you can be able to reduce port challenges, or you can be able to tackle, you can be able to tackle port challenges in port. So with this, we have come to the end of this section. I'll briefly move to the next section that have to do with port state. The reason I started with this for us to be able to understand ports very well before we move to port state inspection. So at the end of this port state inspection, you can be able to ask questions related to this port development in Nigeria and also port state inspection, because we are short of.
Yeah. All right. Bye, everyone. Thanks. So we almost.
Thanks.